We'll finish early. You guys recording? For what you care, what you want, what you do? Yep, no, yep. All right. So gentlemen, welcome. All three of you. Friendly faces. One of the things about OpenPOWER Foundation not many people appreciate is the document infrastructure that we put in place and that we continue to have in place out there. And I'll give credit to actually the OpenStack Foundation for where we discovered sort of the template for what we're doing. But this talk takes you through what we're doing sort of from the high-level user interface aspects and dives down into at least how to go contribute and participate in the documentation development process. The starting point for all documentation inside of the OpenPOWER Foundation is known as the resource catalog. If you go up underneath technical resources off of the OpenPOWER Foundation, you'll literally in that pull down get a link to the resource catalog, which gives you, let's see if I can find the, oh, wrong way, let's go back. Which one's the laser? There we go. Gives you the ability to search on keywords, on tags, etc., looking for just about any piece of documentation that's available. Multiple words in the search, and it will real-time, sort of reminds me of Hadoop type searches. It'll then real-time start taking you and showing you results down below. So when there's nothing, they throw in everything in some order. You can also do it via categorization, a resource type, a main category, a subcategory across the top. But if you don't know what those would be, I typically just go to the search bar and start typing the documentation or the name of the document or something about it, and that's where I start. When you do find something, for example, the documentation development guide, turns out we've written a document for how to do documentation development inside of the OpenPOWER Foundation. Now the heritage for this guide was, really it started out as sort of a template document. You're inventing a group, you're inventing a foundation, you need a look and feel for how all of the documentation is going to look, and so you start working on pretties like what's the title page going to look like? What's the format of the various pages going to look like? And so you may intermittently see this referred to as the template document as well. It's also a great place to base a new document if you're going to build a new document from scratch. It's a great place to start with this documentation development guide, as it's rather short and has some great examples, as I'll show you later. It's a great place to get started as a document. But if we are looking for that, you could start by typing documentation development guide here up top. You'll find it down here in the second item. When you click on that, you get a summary sort of landing page. We stick this intermediate landing page such that as we rev new versions of the document, it always has a unique URL, a unique landing place for all versions of that document. So now we can publish things like, where can I find my ELF ABI v2 document? You can publish that link and it will always be the same independent of what versions roll off of that. And then, along with a description, there is always a link to the document, and I'll show you more directly. This happens to link just to the, in this instance, I'm showing you just the PDF. It actually takes you into the HTML version. From the HTML, you can find the PDF. I'll show you that a little bit later. But that's the general way one finds documents. Yeah, Chris?
So it looks alphabetical. Return, is there a label at all to return so that you get better returns?
On the back? No, I don't believe so. I don't know enough about what the search facility is behind it. I'm going to have to dig a little bit on that one, but you know, I'm making friends with the people doing this because Jeff, in his training to me of how to be the new TSC chair, asked me to go do something, and of course I screwed it up, and so I've been making friends with the people that implemented this. So yeah, it's an interesting question. What? Am I going to let Jeff retire? I don't think it's my choice, but yeah. Correct answer, right. All right, so that's how it works at a high level. As I said, what actually happens once you get into and click on, let's go back one more time. Once you click on this link, you really don't go directly to the PDF. You go to the online version, which is the HTML documentation. So basically, out of our documentation framework, we're generating online HTML files you can go look stuff up in, and a PDF off of it. And so the PDF then basically comes off of the little Acrobat Reader little symbol up there, takes you in your browser embedded to a PDF, or you can, of course, download and see that as well. This is a great example of the difference between the PDF on the page and what you would see in the HTML. Again, this is all part of the framework that we had to generate in creating this from scratch or porting it from the OpenStack environment, all the CMS to build your, or CSS to build your indexes and your table of contents along the left, and all the formatting is one of the things you get to go through as a foundation in a new environment being created from scratch. So this is why Pipe Cleaner Process, the template document, now has become the documentation development guide, was very key to us in that process. Behind this is all open source tooling. If you're familiar with Maven as a build environment, if you love Maven, great. This is a Maven build environment. It's all Java, that's all Java based. The way Maven basically works is there are POM files, think sort of the equivalent in a programming model of make files that can cascade and tier, and ultimately Maven builds are driven off of jar files described out on the internet. And so at some point you say this is this type of project and there's this jar file over there that describes how to build this, and Maven pulls all of that down for you if it's not on your system, and then handles the build off of that. I'll show you how to do that here a little bit later. But I think, you know, one of the key parts again is look and feel, good consistent environment across all the documents, get HTML and PDF off of that in an accessible form, all off of the resource catalog. Behind Maven though, Maven is driving a DocBook build. So we are actually doing documentation work in DocBook. Think of it as like HTML basically, right? It's an XML markup. That means then, if we're doing truly open source sort of documentation work, we can create, as we have done for the documentation development guide, GitHub repositories of source code for the document. And so the GitHub repository for the documentation development guide is out here at the OpenPOWER Foundation community. The docs-template, there's that template term I told you which appear from time to time, is the actual project. And there are now 2 subdirectories, but the actual documentation development guide is there in the template directory, and you'll see the POM file sort of as that make file here that controls the build environment. Again, publicly accessible repositories people can go work in. You could, you know, if Lance wanted to go clone it while he's sitting here, he could go pull it down and clone it. We describe, of course, ways to interact with the community out in the README file, and try to adopt such nice things as the Apache v2 license where at all possible for sharing of the source and moving things around. The other key aspect that gets introduced here is to build in any of this environment, you have the project you're working on, but you also need some common pieces. And so you'll hear us talk about the Doc Master project. That is where some of the key common pages like the common preface, the common appendix, and some of the key common things that you want in all documents reside. So what you'll see as I take you through the steps of how to build this, you actually the first time have to create or pull down or clone the docs master beside wherever your project is, because these have to be in known places with respect to each other, because these POM files start pointing at each other, and the assumption is that the documents in docs template are looking up one and over a level to find their master POM file for the whole project. So what does one do? If I were, and when I give the demo to people live to go build something, it's really a simple 5 sets of steps, and it's a little small out there, but the slides are posted so you can go take a look at them in detail. The first thing you always do, as I said, when getting started in any of this environment, is go clone the master directory. That's simply a git clone right off of the common HTTP URL there. No password necessary, it's a public tree. follow that up, in this case, to build the documentation development guide, then you turn around and you clone that guide. Again, very quick, you see the two examples as I've done it over here on the right-hand side. Step 3, albeit trivial, is to go into the directory you're working on. In this case, it's docs template into the actual template subdirectory. And then the last piece of this is predominantly kicking off the Maven build. Now, Maven is a rather noisy build environment because you're layered upon layer of jars and pieces, and so I've cut out a lot of the sort of noise that occurs here, but you see that to kick off the Maven build, you simply do a Maven generate sources, and it goes out, and that's how you build the world and get both HTML and PDF out of that. You'll notice, as I said, some noise, some information right up here at the top. You start to get some warnings. I snipped out some things. This is a key transition point here with the info applying custom parameterizations. That's where it transitions from building the PDF, which it builds first, to then building the HTML files, and you start seeing a whole bunch of parsing into various HTML files that reads out after that. The bigger your document, the more HTML files it produces. And so if you really want a PDF build, simplest way is to just Control-C after the info telling you it's transitioning or applying the custom parameterizations. But it runs. Now the first time it runs, I will warn you, it goes out and pulls down a whole bunch of jar files. I've had people complain about it taking, depending upon your laptop and your bandwidth, sometimes overnight. That was Steve Monroe's experience. Somebody this past week said it took him 20, 30 minutes to do the first build of the document. They had a little bit better access, but it does pull down bunches and bunches of stuff right up here early as it's starting to build things, that first time you build it. After that, this particular document, when it did complete, took 31 seconds to build the PDF and HTML right here on my Carbon X1 that's a couple generations old. So relatively straightforward and simple. Some of our bigger docs might take a minute or two when I'm thinking of things that are a couple hundred pages long, and it just depends upon how many pieces. Yeah, Jeff? Yeah. Yeah, 1,000 pages. Yeah. Yeah. And most of that time is actually spent in the HTML creation on the back end. The PDF generates very quickly, but when you get to lots of pages, it starts splitting that stuff out into individual HTML files, and I'm sure you start to, using some tools Paul could probably help us with, start to see it back up on I/O writing and waiting for I/O action. So, yeah. And then the last piece is really quite simply, where do I find those nice generated files I created? And it turns out you have to go down a couple levels. You go into the target directory, which is sort of where all pieces get created when you do the Maven build. And then you have to look into the DocBook web help directory and whatever your project name. In this case, it's Doc Devel Guide. It's the only directory in there. And when you go into that directory, you will see the two key pieces. There's your PDF, the Doc Devel guide with a date stamp on it, and there's the index.html right there for the entry web page for where this begins. So that's the simple environment that we're building documentation in for OpenPOWER Foundation. Now, that's how easy it is to build. The next question becomes, how easy is it to do development in it? Well, if I were to go into the docs template directory or the documentation development guide and start looking at the various files, Chapter 2 of the documentation development guide was created by Mr. Brown, our retiring TSC chair, as let me show you how to do a few things while he was playing around one day, and turns out to be the most valuable file in this whole project, because he very nicely goes through, all right, let's create a chapter, let's create a section title, let's do an itemized list, let's go look at an ordered list. Well, you you and I both know you always go to what something looks like in the end when you're doing these sorts of things, and then go grep for the common piece of text, such as example of itemized list, and we can come over, we can find the example of the itemized list and start to look at what the tags look like for an itemized list in DocBook. Again, very much like what HTML looks like. Yes, it's an itemized list versus an unordered list or a UL tag, but very friendly. Tag language with closing out in the XML form with the slash to close out the tags, and syntax that you can readily go find for how to do such things. So that's what we typically write in. When we go create a new document, we will take as an example perhaps this chapter example.xml file and start hacking at it with your favorite editor. I'm sure Chris uses Emacs because only real men use VI to do development with, and there are all sorts of other ways you could do it. Jeff, he was kind of a GUI sort of guy, so he'd, Jeff uses it. But, you know, the net is you can look at this XML in any environment you want to. It's just like writing code, quite honestly. And the compiler warnings sometimes are just about as esoteric. But it's very easy to find examples of what you need to do, and that's what we tried to set out in the documentation development guide in this examples chapter. There are numerous examples. So what I've shown you is just the documentation development guide. Probably our greatest victory of this past year was getting the ELF-ABI v2 document over and running. It is now up in the same form. It actually is no longer private. It is public, so anybody, again, just like the docs template or the development document or the documentation development guide, can go out, pull the source, and build the ELF v2 ABI document. It's also out in the resource catalog. As we're working on new updates and new generations of that, then it will occur in Git. It'll be developed in an open source way. When we get ready to publish, then we can start doing builds and posting them more formally as necessary. And now we have documentation that can be managed by a community for the benefit of all people in the environment. So that's probably our greatest success of this past year. We are in the process of bringing over what was called the PAPR specification, for those of you that know deep development stuff, or as we contributed to the OpenPOWER Foundation, the Linux on Power architecture reference, or low PAPR. I don't remember exactly what we ended up calling it. We're in the process, again, of converting that, splitting it out. We're going to break it into some pieces and turn them all into open source projects by the time we get done with DocBook and XML. And you'd say, well, that's not very impressive, except that this was the 1,000-page document that was in FrameMaker before we got started inside of IBM, and this is what Jeff and I do in our free time, is free these documents from FrameMaker to get them into DocBook. And that's on the horizon of pieces that are going to be coming out here and be able to be managed again by a community and grow and develop from there. Chris, you were going to ask a question?
Oh, I am. You know it's coming.
No, go ahead.
So, I'm a command line guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm graphically challenged, to be honest.
So's Jeff.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. I appreciate you joining me.
Yeah.
And I live in a command line. Why are you not generating this also in text form so I can just pull the entire document tree and grep through it?
Well, you can.
I'll do it so much faster.
So you would.
Which file has every single word in it in 3 seconds, and I'll be able to pull up that file in 1 second, and I'll be at the command line where I don't have to go anywhere else.
So you want it without tags, basically.
I went without, yeah, I mean, in the end,
Okay.
that's where a lot of us live, and going over into some graphical form, I want to just pull all documentation down on a Git pull, and I want to.
Do you know Java?
What?
Do you know Java?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm always looking for volunteers for how to extend this Maven build project. So this might be something we could take on.
We can do this.
You know, I could see some value in this. It might very well be trivial. You know, the formatting of how do you get it to, you know, when do you wrap the line and such. I'm sure somebody's done it, and we could certainly hang it. If I go back to one of the directories, we could absolutely hang it, you know, out here in raw text form off of there just as easily as well. Would you envision one big text file? Okay. Yeah. And somebody's probably already done this in the Maven environment, because, you know, Maven it can do everything, including, you know, solve world hunger and create world peace at the same time. So,
I think you just have to get it right.
yo, I'm sure it's just a matter of finding the time to hit it right. So, but no, that's a good point. Good point. There's always something. No, it's good. So a few other additional thoughts and comments here, particularly in the documentation development guide. We walk you through how to install the tools that you need to do this, right? Maven, what else? That's on there. We take you through the little bit deeper dive into the document project structure, right? I told you docs master needed to be beside docs template. We walk you through sort of why that is in the POM files and those things. We walk you through step by step how, if I'm going to create a new document from scratch, I could copy something and do that. I also have a whole section that comes from you know, weeks, months, years of therapy trying to debug things. So I've tried to put hints and tips when you get this error, what it's really trying to tell you, where you look, etc. And we walk through from an OpenPOWER Foundation, what are the steps to get a document published through the OpenPOWER Foundation, the steps, the reviews, the approvals, those sorts of things. And then, as I mentioned, Chapter 2 is the set of examples that Jeff started, and every time we find a new example, we stick it in there. Somebody says, hey, how do you do this? If it isn't in Chapter 2, I make sure it ends up there by the time it gets answered. So, and then, let's see, is it here? Oh, so final thoughts on this. You know, we really are, as a foundation, committed to open, and that goes to the documentation as well. Being able to build this, you can build it on your Mac, you can build it even on Windows, although it's a little bit more painful. It's certainly an environment tuned to working in a Linux-type environment. The document that I took you through, how to pull, how to build this documentation development guide, its goal in life is to answer all those questions as to how you participate. And what we've been able to create out of that looks great, right? I mean, it gives us a good foot forward from the OpenPOWER Foundation. These documents look almost professionally done. They're available off the web. Yes, it would be nice to have it in raw text form. Thank you for volunteering to help us with that, Chris. And the key part is, remember the resource catalog. You'd be surprised at how many people don't know where the resource catalog is off of the OpenPOWER Foundation. And we're always looking for volunteers. And just so you feel like we're really thinking about other things, the piece that I didn't write down here that it actually is the next side effect of this sort of environment is the minute you can do open source documentation, the next thing you want to do, of course, is build 2 versions of the document from 2 different tags or 2 different directories and mark it up and be able to tell the difference. And Jeff and I mostly have that problem solved. We have a set of tooling that we've been working on to do that so that you don't have to stick tags in trees as you build it, and that's where we're headed. And as we get those tools a little bit better state, we'll make those tools available for people to use in the foundation. Right now, we use it because we're working with all of the documentation people, but that's the goal of where we're headed. Version X, version Y, be able to create version Z that's the diff between the two, see what was added, see what was removed, and never once have to touch the tree for anything more than maybe a tag, or you know, maybe if you want to make some changes after you're done, but never have to go turn on tags and enable and disable tags like we used to have to do in the old days. So this ultimately ends up in a very nice environment that models code in the end. You could put it into CI/CD sorts of environments and do a lot of automated things off of this when we get done. So we're not done thinking here. I like the text file idea. We're working on the change idea. That's mostly done. So, you know, we'll get right on your project. As soon as you show up in the TSC, we'll, yeah.
I figure, you know, we can do text and man pages because in the end, you need formatting, you can use man.
Yeah, I don't know where I put the man pages, but I would take the raw text. I could see that. Yeah.
The man page is not searchable. That's the problem.
Yeah.
The grep through the text is searchable.
Yeah.
You know, you were just saying something about formatting. It's like,
So what do I do with images?
what's that?
What do I do with images in the raw text file?
Just
link to the thing?
Yeah, you could easily because
Okay.
you know, you can. So on my command line, I do have a window open that's graphical. I just refuse to use it.
Okay.
So I run 2. So this is real Linux. I run 2 desktops at the same so that you can't actually bring a window across. They're actually two full desktops right now. And one side is completely all command line, and one side is completely graphical. So if I click on one, though, it'll jump over to the graphical side and open up a window for me. So
Okay,
puts a loop.
cool. Okay. All right, yeah, Lance?
Can I play devil's advocate?
Sure.
Why did you use DocBook instead of some other thing? Because I've had experience.
Yep.
With Sphinx Doc internally.
Yeah, and actually, that's yet another project we have underway. Turns out if you follow OpenStack, I think they went to RST,
Yeah, that essentially. Yeah,
Relaxed Structured
I
Text,
think the kernel has just switched a lot of their.
one of the markdown languages. The real answer to that question is, a lot of the, I was going to say crap, is that allowed to put in? A lot of the stuff we're bringing in the documents that come in with tables and things that don't do well in Markdown. And I've had a guy internally want to take the document that we were talking about that was thousands of pages and said he was going to take it to RST, and I laughed at him and said, you wouldn't believe all the problems we've had with tables, even in DocBook. In DocBook, you can do just about everything right and wrong associated with tables in the language. And so DocBook works very well and gives us a lot of control. It is not it's better for ID writers, more, people that have done a little more writing than developers. Now, what we have done, if you go out to OpenPOWER, the firmware communities that Stuart and others play in, they're working in RST. I am working on the ability to go from RST to DocBook and publish this way. I had one attempt using a set of tools that just had too many assumptions in it, and I have a second attempt that's been created. And so my goal would be to support two environments, right? For the basic things, support RST and support DocBook by the time we get done. So it's a good question.
I worked around the table problem by using the CSV import table feature of the Sphinx Doc. The CSV file.
Okay.
And I just tell Sphinx Doc, here's this file for this, here's my headers.
Yeah, my problem was that, like I said, these tables weren't even in CSV form. So they were pretty ugly, and Jeff will concur. We spent a lot of time with tables in this environment. So, and if you really want to get engaged, think about change bars inside of tables. Oh, that hurts at some point, doesn't it, Jeff? So that's what we're up to. But thank you for the questions. Good dialogue. Appreciate that, and hopefully you enjoy the rest of your summit.